Well, welcome to CreateAWorld. Let me tell you a minute what CreateAWorld is, because it's probably not a name you're familiar with. About 10 years ago, part of a greater community began forming just kind of naturally and around the work of Tantra Mat. In the beginning, our gatherings together started with a feeling that there was something underneath everything that was happening everywhere. And I know you probably connect with that. Something fundamental, something innate, something natural that was pushing up through the very premise of what we as humanity had become to think that life was, and what it was real. Many of us had begun to question any feelings or thoughts that separated us from ourselves, from each other, and from the richness of being alive. Do you connect with that? I do, because I was one of the people. And so is Kea. We now find ourselves at a pivotal point in human history, a period of time where there is new energy, new data, new everything, things we can harness for awareness within ourselves and within the world of which we are a part. There seems to be new ways of being alive that we're picking up on, each in our own unique and essential way, no matter your age, your gender, your politics, or religious leanings. Throughout history, we as human beings have discovered the next movement of our own existence through exploring what is rising newly and sharing with each other what we're experiencing. First, it was probably around the fire. With our grandparents, it was probably around the front porch. Then we did it by phone, and now Zoom. Pretty cool, huh? And this is how humanity has learned to live in new ways. This group of people came together around the work of Tantra Mat. Together, we listen, we respond, we ask questions. And that's the important thing. We ask questions. We did not realize that asking the questions, being curious, and not knowing the answers would open up in each of us a through line, a way through our thoughts and assumptions and beliefs about life, ourselves, and the world that came probably from our historic uprising, I guess is the word, I don't know, a way into each of our own innate and natural states of awareness, that each of us in our own way became real, more real to ourselves. And this is what's behind CreateAWorld. I and others are here to live life out loud with you in one medium that's shared across all walks of life in human beings, and that is conversation. So welcome to CreateAWorld. My friend here is Kea Bardeen. She's been in this work a lot longer than I, and I am Elektra Porzel. I'm the director of the Language of Consciousness Institute. Kea and I have been discussing a lot of different media and what we're seeing rising in the field that is starting to make everyone aware or differently aware. And in that, we've been having some great discussions. And the first one I want to talk about, because it was the weirdest one, was, we went to see the movie Banshee in Sharon. And poor Kea, I kept asking her during the movie, I said, why are we here? Are we watching this movie? Because it's one of those movies that starts slow, that you're not quite sure what's going on throughout the whole thing. And it isn't until after you've watched it and you think about it all week long that you start to discover actually what they got in. You know, it's one of those things that they got in underneath and explained it. Kea, you want to give your perspective on that movie?
It was one of those movies where I would like turn to Elektra and go, is it safe to look now? You know, it's like, and so for anybody that hasn't seen it, there may be some spoiler pieces in here. So just so you know, because I'm going to give just a brief synopsis of the events so that the consciousness piece that I'm going to share makes any sense. So it really is a movie about the personal dynamics between these two friends, Patrick and Colin. Mm-hmm. And there's a break in that friendship. And then we watch what unfolds between the two of them and how it impacts this little community on an island in Ireland, and actually how they probably are all being impacted by the isle that they're on and the life that they're living. So it was quite a study after I got away from it and kind of the shock of it. And I started to see how masterful the storyline was at getting me to look at, wow, what really is in operation when these two men who are good friends, almost for no reason at all, except for one of them realizes he needs his own space. It's really as simple as that. That it escalates into this picture of self-destruction, where the person that's trying to have space goes, if you don't stay away from me, spoiler, I'm going to cut off all my fingers. So the story of the movie is about how this plays out and how the friend almost can't help themselves but come in and try to re-engage with his friend who he's desperately pained by losing. And this is the question that arose for me, because Elektra, you did a beautiful job of saying, really this time is about asking questions, and maybe asking questions we don't normally ask, so that there might be a chance for a new perspective to rise. I don't have any answers. All I've got is, this is how it impacted me. So the more I got to thinking about it, and I go, in the end, both friends stay together, even though it's this series of uncomfortable interactions. But I came to feel like something emerged for both of them out of this terror and out of this struggle that started to allow them to be themselves and be free.
Yeah.
And that really the problem was not the problem between the two friends as much as it was the sense of like being trapped and imprisoned on the island without enough, exposure to joy and gladness and newness. And they just didn't, then they worked it out their own way. And in a way, that was their art form. That was their creative play with each other, as awful as it looked from the outside. Which it did. The question that rose in my mind was Patrick still really being, in some ways, a friend to himself and a friend to Colum, in the sense of he stayed and played the whole thing out and kept letting it unfold.
But he really shifted his idea of who he was, because when his Colum, who is the man who said, I don't want to be your friend anymore, told him he was boring. And he was going, but I've always wanted to be nice, but I'm just nice. And that was kind of the personality that he put on. And we didn't know it was a personality he put on until the movie progresses, when he becomes not nice. But it was an evolving for himself as well, because he really had believed that I'm just a nice guy. But it did turn out that he was kind of boring. I mean, Colum says, he says, you spend 2 hours talking about the stuff you found in the shit of your donkeys. And he says, that's it. That was like the topper, And each of them is trying to figure out who they are. And we got to watch like Colum. Colum was very artistic. There was all sorts of drama masks and different art stuff around his house, which you really wouldn't expect in that farm country, which was kind of a barren land. And he said, before I die, I want to produce something beautiful. So he was writing a violin piece. And in it, he was trying to find who he was. And in him trying to find who he was, he instigated this thing of Patrick finding out who he was. Because by the end of the movie, Patrick wasn't a nice guy anymore, but there was a clarity in his voice about what he needed. And that wasn't there before. So in levels of consciousness, you're talking about two guys moving through well, the eye of the needle comes to mind, but it's not that. It's like a crucible. And in the crucible, there was a lot that was destroyed. But there was also that ending where they were coming together. Now, I understand from a friend that for the Irish, the movie has a lot more meanings because the tradition, the name of it is the Banshee Insurance of Insurance. And banshees originally were considered to be female spirits that would start wailing when someone was going to die. And in this movie, they had a number of subplots running, one of which was this old lady that nobody wanted to talk to and would hide if they thought she was coming. And so I just thought she was some old lady, who nobody wanted to talk to because she probably stayed too long to talk. Well, it turns out, I finally discovered it, that she was the Banshee. And she predicted 2 deaths. She didn't say who they were. She didn't wail. It wasn't any of the traditional wailing. But even at the end, when these 2 men are standing on the beach and have come to a new understanding of each other, she's sitting on the road above. So you're going like, and so you don't know about the 2 deaths. We didn't tell you that, so we didn't give that away. But there are very rare things that movies make me think deeper. And this one did. And in our own lives, I started thinking, well, in what way am I column? And in what way am I Patrick? Do I have an idea about who I am? And I think I'm acting that out. And then I get mad at somebody. If they don't think like I do, then I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I think we're both. And in watching them do this back and forth, the dipping into the desired future for Colum and the Patrick trying to kind of recreate a world that he had been so comfortable in, but really didn't fit him. It wasn't him. So anyway, it's a rare thing.
That's great. Yeah, I think that there were a lot of themes, and I love that you've asked yourself, what's the Patrick in me? What's the Colum in me? Because it's funny. I've had an experience just yesterday, which was very much like the movie in the sense of it really put a spotlight, and I was in the center of it, on the tension between a personal interest and a collective interest, and how do you work that out? And that it's often not pretty or comfortable or resolvable. And I want to move toward like peace and harmony and getting along and that's the underlying theme, and I actually trust that. Like I trust that it's always moving that direction. However, in the short term, I often have to just go, oh my God, and let go. Like, what if everything falls apart? I want to go back to the movie for a minute, then I'll talk a little bit about, my own experience and how I'm viewing it.
Okay.
So the movie, the other thing that was really significant for me in the movie was, in the end, everybody's secrets got revealed.
Yes.
Because of the dynamic between these 2 trying to work it out, all secrets got revealed. And it's fascinated me that there's so much in the astrology of this moment in time about revelation and things being revealed, the old story ending, the new story beginning. And to watch it in that movie and go, wow, that's like that astrological prediction. That's like that energy. So I was in a meeting with my British group, with my White Spring group yesterday, and the issue at hand was my personal Damanhurian spiritual practice and whether it was congruent with the beliefs of the place.
Oh,
or
you're kidding.
It's a foreign imposition.
Oh, okay.
And there's a real guardedness that I find about the new, which I often have been for
Yeah,
all
because,
for the
well, you're
struggle.
the American into
The American, and
Yeah.
also I've just always thought differently.
differently.
You know, I just have, and that just seems to be part of my design. And I believe it will work its way out. But it, in a way, it was reminiscent of the movie because it's the same kind of discomfort. Because in a way, my way of thinking and my explorations, I think are contributory to a larger whole. But from another perspective, which may be just as valid, it's like, no, there's something weird and maybe dangerous. So, you know, I know I run across this in my own life. And, you know, again, I go back to, I have to trust that something much larger than myself is working itself out here. And that it's actually a benefit to the whole group to
be part of the working it out.
To be part of the working it out, because in the end, everybody will have more freedom to be themselves. Because in a way, when we come into a group, especially like Elektra is saying, I'm an American in a British country, even though my grandparents are British and I have a lot of connection with that. There's something, you know, that we start out at the beginning of a group kind of just trying not to rock the boat, trying to let something build and stabilize long enough that we could be seen as a human rather than as an American or somebody who was in business, for God's sake. This is another thing that is very cool from that perspective, and that happened to think technology was a positive advance. You know, so there are a lot of things that, so it's interesting to have watched that movie with you, Elektra, and then find it's out picturing in my own life in a way where something I did because I felt like that was part of my own spiritual practice and it was fine to do, others looked at as, no, that's bringing in like an invasive species. And I'm like, oh, okay.
They're doing that a lot though, aren't they? I mean, with your partner and that other, if it's new, all of a sudden maybe their radar's up.
It is. It's
their radar's just up. Before they didn't say anything, but all of a sudden they're going like, wow, yeah, something new and news around it. Can I trust it that my world will remain the same?
Right. And I, you know, I know that that's what I'm at the effect of, is that I've rocked the boat in a couple of big ways this last year.
Yeah.
And to give people a little backstory, I have a role in caring for the White Spring in Glastonbury. And I have ownership of the building above it's hard to describe. I'll show you a few pictures later if you want. You can guide me, Elektra.
Okay.
You know, the vision I have is that it's been badly broken over time. The whole water cycle has been broken. The environment has been broken. The spring itself has been divided up into pieces of private ownership. So the vision I've had was to bring things back into some sort of unity and also then make it a coherent functional unit for the public that would be there for future generations. Like that's the vision. Mm-hmm. And it's generally shared by the group. However, when specifics come in, like money, everybody gets a little bit, their radars go up. I love that expression. That's actually perfect. So we're just going through a phase where everybody's radars are up and they're uncomfortable. And now we wait and see what everybody does.
I think it's one of the things that's fascinating about this whole, you know, you're a stranger in a foreign land kind of relationship. And it's almost like what Patrick really was a local. And he played the role of a local boy really well. And what through his world, I mean, he was a friend with with Colum, which would have said he already had a tolerance for difference. But then the difference became too much. So in your case, they have a tolerance for your difference to a point. And then it's sort of like, I don't know how this fits in my body. I don't know how this fits in the rest of the world. And isn't that the same process we all go through? Because when a new idea is introduced, let's say a brand new idea that society hasn't thought about before, people start getting antsy because it makes their world uncomfortable. And yet, at the same time, I think because they're asking the question, you know that there's this door is opening. So that's what you say. You trust that something's happening. And I think that's the exciting thing for us. That's why we continue to ask questions. That's why you're encouraging them to talk it and ask questions and be with you in that resettling of the configuration. It's sort of like, it's a total, if there's family constellation, right? And when a baby is born in the family, all the positions in the constellation change. When somebody dies, that it reconfigures itself. But it's the same phenomenon when you bring in like the purchase that you did this last year really changed the configuration around White Spring. And while it's one of those things that it sounds like a great idea until you've done it, and then they start going like, what?
Yeah.
So we get a sense of who we are shifted, what I am connected to shifting. I think it's probably easier to blame your Dominher stuff than it is to blame their uneasiness of the building and the White Springs being expanded to include something else.
Yeah. Well, and it doesn't even, it's just a natural phenomenon that comes up. And, of course, I look back and I think, well, how could I have prepared the field better? And the honest answer is,
I don't think you can.
I couldn't have. And, now is the moment when I think I'm excited because I go, this is an opportunity for us to really dig into something that really matters to us. And then we'll really know what's real about each other.
Yes,
without this
absolutely,
we would continue being Patrick nice.
Or you'd be column pulling away where nothing gets answered. One of the things that really didn't help Column was he totally said, go away to Patrick. And if he had said, look, I just need time, so let's just meet for beer Monday, Wednesday, Friday or something, I don't know, some schedule, it might have been easier for Patrick. And I'm just sitting here going like, well, how do I actually get used to new phenomenon in my field? And a paced submersion isn't probably always the best. I think you can go unconscious about newness that's coming into your world. Maybe a good, kick in the butt is probably the best way to get people's attention about things that are going to change how their world is for them.
Right, because then they just there's a choice point that occurs. But yeah, I think you're right, Elektra. When I think about it in those terms, how could I manage the personalities? It's actually then the question that rises is, and how much of that isn't up to me?
Yeah.
How much of that is just, this is exactly how it needed to unfold. And I just have to move with what's moving and know that things are being shifted. And that, like, the question that rises for me is, how do I let go of my attachments? So, I mean, it's really a pressure. You go like, okay, I'll let go of my attachments. We'll see how to navigate. And yeah.
Is it expanding the field large enough to hold their discomfort more of what you're doing than, well, I don't know what your attachments are, but it seems to me that
my biggest one is group harmony. This is my people centricity, because I find that when groups are harmonic, they actually get more work done. And things are easier and nicer for everybody. And then when things get uncomfortable, things break, and people have a healing. All of us have a healing. It's not them and me. It's really, I'm watching a collective process occur that looks very much like the movie, where it could be pinned down to, this is a Patrick Column issue. But the movie shows us that it really isn't. It's
a community
phenomenon that's emerging almost from the land itself, from the collective community, all the secret holding, all the, like a great washing is happening. So,
well, that's a nice way to look. Even if you looked at it from about your own team, it's a great washing that's happening.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's a nice. It's like light moves into darkness and makes more space.
Right. Right. I'm glad you brought up light and darkness, because this is the other thing that I was excited for us to talk about a little bit. And it is really about how uncomfortable these phases are, because I feel like this, collectively, we're in a transition phase right now.
Yeah, I know.
Between one reality and the next. And I was listening to Pam Gregory's themes for 2023 again. And, it's so clear that we're moving toward the end of a story. Tantra often says this, of domination and control. And we're moving into a more collaborative Aquarian. We are moving more into the Aquarian energy of the collective. And yet, we're all babies at it. Really, as humans, we're all babies at it. I don't know how to be collective, except in the old way I learned how to be collective. But as we see with the way the friendship between Colin and Patrick used to work, that old way ain't working anymore.
No,
so all of a sudden, that pressure for everybody to, as you said so well, look newly at themselves. And who am I? Like Patrick has to go, who am I? Colin has to go, who am I? And what am I moving into? And even with the destruction of the movie, for me, there was at the end a sense of peace, in each of the men. Like they had found a place for themselves. It wasn't comfortable, but in a way, they had reached some sort of new plateau of stability. So
you mentioned another book you were listening to. It was The Invisible Highway?
The Invisible Rainbow.
Rainbow.
And it actually fits with this, because it's sort of a history of all the transitions that we've taken ourselves through as humanity with electricity. Starting, probably much farther back, but the one I remember is Marconi and the radio wave. And then, we move up to the electrification of our houses. And then we move up to, certainly the modern era with Wi-Fi, and then, 3G, 4G, 5G. And my takeaway from it, there are lots of takeaways possible from this book, but the inquiry of the author was, what is the impact of these electromagnetic frequencies on humans, especially on the human physiology? And the author shows quite convincingly that what we've generally considered pandemics, or what was called influenza, because it was something that was being influenced by something, interestingly enough.
Yeah, very interesting.
Which is really interesting, that it was really correlate with the introduction of new electromagnetic frequencies on the planet.
Yeah.
So, and that only a theory like that, which obviously is not going to be consistent with the contagion theory that we're now exploring for ourselves. But the fascinating thing, positive thing from the book that I was excited about was he goes back and he talks about Marconi putting up these huge towers on the Isle of Wight in England to transmit radio signals across the Atlantic. And then he tracks the decline of Marconi's health and his sanity. And when he marries, he brings his new wife here, and she immediately becomes ill. Then he moves her to a place in England, but it also has a tower, and she gets more ill. All the bees on the Isle of Wight die. Every bee they bring in from the mainland dies, or like 90%. So it's like, oh my God, here's this horrible thing. This is like the movie. Oh my God, here's this horrible break. People are hurting themselves. It's not good. But then what we discover is that within a period of time, the bees come back. The bees reestablish themselves, and the humans are then able to live with the cell tower and not suffer these, the same extreme symptoms.
So their bodies got used to that vibration.
What my sense is, if I don't look at myself as this is my life, I'm an individual human, it's essential for me to have this life. If I look at myself as more the participant in an ongoing human experiment, then I go, well, maybe instead of going, oh, that was wrong or that was terrible, well, maybe instead, what if I looked at it like, wow, look how these new frequencies and vibrations come onto the planet, and the fact that we can align with them. It doesn't mean I can make an assessment of, was this a good thing to align with or wasn't it? Because that's still a legitimate question in my mind. But I do feel like it goes through these iterations. And it also then made me very aware of my environment. Again, like in the movie, like what was the fact that there were, these people on an island that had to live with each other their whole lives. They got bored.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that. We live with electricity all our lives. Our bodies are impacted. What do I think about that? And this is really raw feed. I don't know what I think about it. The exciting thing for me was things rebalance themselves in a new order afterward. I mean, like the bees came back and people could live on the island, and it didn't create Armageddon. So there's that resilience it demonstrated. But it also really made me feel like we need to be accountable, or I need to be accountable and responsible in my own way for assessing the invisible rainbow around me and its impact on me, and in a sense, others.
Well, I think that there's been a lot of research to support that author's position, is that when schools wire the entire school, they find that it affects how the children learn. There's more illness in seniors and stuff the nearer you are to a tower, even to now. So I find it fascinating that when we first started really increasing the internet, and there was a lot of hullabaloo about that, about the damage that it was doing to people. And if you look at today, I remember a time when I could see, like when people started using internet browser, well, not browsers, anyway, where they would have their own wireless in the house. And I'd start to see that, oh my God, there was 3 or 4 of them in my house. It wasn't just my internet, it was 3 or 4. And then I just started not paying attention to it. And here I am in an apartment building with 70 people with 70, and so we have, even though it seems like we've adapted, we don't know the impact, and I think you and I were talking the other day saying people on that aisle didn't have that impact. Our grandparents who lived on farms didn't have any electromagnetic impact. So we don't know why humans have illnesses, why we are susceptible, why people can't handle a certain amount of discontent. If your system is constantly in a vibration like this, it affects the system. I mean, when I was a massage therapist, and they would always, oh God, before that I was running a training department in HR, and we were always getting information about that the greatest source of illness is stress. Well, what stresses the body but more electromagnetic fields? So then as a human species, we start saying, well, where's the trade-off? Right. Because if you're opening up to more, you're bringing more into your field with this availability, like you and I. Now, we happen to be across town with each other, right?
Right.
But everybody who's listening to us is in all parts of the country and even the world. So we couldn't have done this before. Maybe you and I could have gotten together and gathered some local women and had a discussion. But the fact that we can do this, it's sort of like, okay, am I going to trade off this opportunity that I have to open up to more? Like last night, I had a discussion group about Einstein's next steps, Charles Einstein. And let's see who was there. There was somebody from New Mexico. There was somebody from California. And several other places not here. So could I have had the chance to, Midwest, one gal was to get my brain stimulated and my sensing of what the world is or could be if I didn't have the internet. So then I start to say, maybe it's a good trade-off. I don't know what the trade-off is. I really don't know what the trade-off is. But I do know that I highly, 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 highly value being with others. And to me, that's kind of being with others in conversation. I'll have to say, I love conversation. And it's what I would say is more substantive conversation, because we're really probing. We're really trying to figure out what the world is. And in that trying to figure out what the world is or where it's going, we start framing who we're going to be in that. Because it becomes, again, in my mind of what the world is, right? And if it's sort of like Patrick had a very tight, he knew about the secrets on the island, but he never said them, right? And he had a very tight version of what he could be. And it was very obvious that he had say, okay, I'm Irish, I live on the island, I have a donkey, and I have a horse, and I have a cow, and I go down to the pub every day. That was it. Then the column chose to shift that pattern. And with that, Patrick had to expand and shift kind of his concepts of how he was going to be in the world. And he didn't like it. And sometimes we don't like it.
Right. I think that's true. And I think for me, it's that the discipline of saying, I don't like it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or bad, or it needs to be fixed. It needs to be sat with. And what you're bringing up for me too is consciousness and where it fits into all of this and our empowerment in this. Because one of the things I just said was, I have a choice about how I view things. And I feel like a lot for me, and a lot I've gained from Tantra and the work we've all done in the field has been, I understand the power of taking accountability for my own perspective and seeing how best I can shift it in the moment to something more life enhancing. It may not be a great effort, may not be my best, but at least if I'm continuously efforting to go, well, what's more life enhancing is the way of seeing it. So one of the things that I find life enhancing that I'll share here is my fascination with water and the role water plays. And I went back and particularly listened to Pam Gregory's themes for 2023 last night, because I was trying to remember what she said. And she said that Saturn is now moving out of Capricorn into Pisces. And so she says, for this year, water is becoming a focus. There will be issues around water. And she also says, and this will also mean water in the body, the blood, the immune system. So we have two forms, we have external water, but we also are internal water. Yeah. She says structures may be discovered underwater. We may find that governments are building something underwater, like the channel. But she also says something else that I was particularly grabbed by. She says, we're going to look more at the structures of water. And she begins to talk about Emoto and his conversation with water crystals and how that conversation impacted the water. So the example with Emoto that many of you are probably familiar with is when words like love and gratitude were put on the jar with the water, and love and gratitude was sent to the water, perfect crystals were produced. When hate and noise and disruption were projected at the water, the crystals were largely chaotic. So we have this amazing tool within us, and I'm going to call it a tool, and there could be better language, but anyway, we have the water within us, the blood within us. So how we react with our own water, our own earth, and how we feed our own consciousness into our own body fluids has to be impacting us at all times.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that we pull away when a situation is harsh or someone's difficult, is because it impacts our water. You know, it can even like we were talking about electricity impacting our physiology. I think also, you know, being in stressful situations and whatnot affects the water in our body. The thing is, I think because we're relationally related to our water, or can be, you know, that the only avenue I see to go is like, I am not going to stop 5G. You know, I am not going to probably stop the internet. And that's a question and there may be people whose job that is and whose passion that is. So I want to make clear that I'm not in that conversation particularly. I've been in more of an internal conversation, is what resources do I personally have in the moment I can call on, and how can I think about them to help me be strong? In other words, without changing the world, how can I work with my own water in my body? Because changing the world in that way is not mine to do. That's all.
Right. Yeah.
It's not somebody else's, or it's not a good thing, but it's just, I'm trying to It's my way of changing the world is I would love to reunify the spring and protect the water from, you know, some of the things that have been done that aren't life enhancing for water. And that's mine in the world to do. But inside myself, then I go, okay, well, so how do I work with
the water of your body?
The water of my body and balancing all the impacts. How do I put consciousness into, you know, my blood, my saliva, my digestive fluids, my love for myself, my gratitude for my body, my gratitude for all these miraculous systems that are going on that I'm largely unconscious of, especially at those times when they're impacted. This is what I'm getting around to. You know, can I mitigate for myself, you know, that I know my crystalline structure is impacted by disruption. It can be even impacted by watching a movie in which things happen. And then how do I recenter and rebalance so that I can continue to be a positive influence in.
The other thing that might happen, there's two things. One is, like you said earlier, that you had a basic desire for harmony and harmonious relationships. So what if you worked with the fluids in your body with harmony, so that before you ever went into a meeting, you were fully permeated with that? Because one of the other things we know is that there's mirroring in cells. So if your system is saturated and all the cranial fluid and the blood and the lymph and everything is saturated with that state of harmony, which is a state of consciousness, then that will probably, what you would have without having to say anything, would have a shift in the fluids of the people that are in the group.
Yeah, and I really feel like that's the end game. I mean, it's not an end game because there's no end game. It's just a series of end games. But I really do feel like the reason that the three monks walked away from the nuclear explosion in Hiroshima was because of the frequency they carried.
Yeah.
And you know, so the shift from outer to inner for me of like, I need to understand about electromagnetics. I need to understand they're impacting me. The thing is, for me, it's like the most powerful place I can go for me is, well, then how do I fill my cells with harmony? How do I work with the water in my body to make it, more resilient to the things that are coming at it? How am I empowered?
Right. It seems like this is a subject that's coming up everywhere. And what struck me when you were talking was what Tantra always says, just enlarge the field. So that whatever it is that seems discordant becomes a much smaller part of the field and is no longer having that impact. And I was in a class, quantum bioengineering class, yesterday. And one of the things that she was working on was relationships. And it was using the figure of the Vescus Piscus, where you have yourself or here and the other there, whether it's a group or a person or a thing or a project. And you're aiming a certain program at the meta point of the two that a Vescus Piscis has. And what you're aiming to do is increase the heart connection between the two. So we have all these avenues that are opening up now for us to increase the field of awareness that we have, but take responsibility for, like you're saying, I'm going to do things that bring harmony into the water in my system, my cellular structure, knowing that we're all related. You cannot not, if you do that for yourself, or I do this relationship thing with quantum bioengineering, we're all impacting the field. And that's what consciousness is, because I went and looked at the glossary for the definition of it. And the glossary is with the Language of Consciousness Institute. And it says it's a state of being aware of one's own existence and the activities consistent with that existence. So if we look at the movie, Patrick had a certain level of consciousness about who he was in the beginning of that movie. By the end of the movie, it was a totally different awareness of his own existence and everything that had to do with that existence. I think we're working on the same thing when we're saying, when we're asking the questions and we're saying, okay, what are the resources I have to expand the field that I hold, holding things that, like everything has a place, right? Well, if everything has a place, even if,
and the creation.
Right. And so we expand enough. So that's a level of consciousness that we're aware of, that we hold it, but we don't let it dominate. I think it's like when you write a template 3 or 4, you reorganize the way that, well, you redefine what something is, and it no longer becomes this, it becomes nicer. It becomes something that's life enhancing and life generating, and thus changing how we operate within that, or when people talk about it or use that word, it changes how we operate in the world and the way we see it. And I think every time that each of us is expanding this awareness of our own existence, because in the beginning, Patrick's a good example, but even if you think about from when we were babies, we kept expanding our awareness of our own existence and the activities that. So I have a grandson who's 12, and he's asking questions. Now, it wasn't questions that like yesterday. He's wanting to know why women have to wear makeup. And he says, why do you wear makeup? Why do you do that? Then he finally says, Grandma, you need to stop wearing makeup and just embrace your wrinkles. And I said,
oh, that's so adorable.
Only a 12-year-old kid could say that, because if you said it to me, I'd go like, you embrace your wrinkles and I'll embrace mine.
Right. But it's like, that's why we have the new. There's the other thing Pam Gregory said that really struck me. She said, you look at governance under the old model. So without a judgment, it's right or wrong. It's generally old white men. And she said, what we're going to see starting in 2023 and then moving forward is the youth are going to come in and begin to take those positions, and they'll do it very differently. They'll do it from their design.
Right.
And the thing is, we're them. I mean, this is the hard part for me to get over. I'm so used to thinking of me as I'm me, and in a certain way I am, but I'm also all of it at the same time. And that's really what often helps me get over judgment. Not that I don't go through it at first, but I can bring myself back around by going, yeah, that's just the way of it. And I'm glad it's going that way. It's time for it to go that way. You know, even if I wrinkle and move out of the picture in this physical incarnation, that's a beautiful thing.
It is. I mean, it's just fun to laugh with it and move with it. You know, it's like when we have children who just say what they see, right?
They do.
And then they get older and they start still saying what they see. Like the Thunberg, is that her name? The girl who's
Greta, yeah.
Yeah. She just said what she saw.
Right.
She didn't come up with a new fact. She just was able to say, hey, this is what's going on. And in the same way that my grandson, like he read the Iliad the other day, and the graphic novel version. I'll say he wasn't reading the full thing, but he got really mad about why would they kill all those people over one woman? Why was this okay? So there's major moral questions being answered or being questioned, but he doesn't have to accept the way that you and I had to accept it, or other generations. And if we can give this younger generation that open space, right? That ability to know themselves and know that they are there and they can choose their future. They don't, you know, the good news is a lot of what the institutions that we knew are dying. They're corrupted, they're falling up. Yeah, and
it's a natural process of decay. I mean, yeah, it's like, okay, that's how nature operates too. Mm-hmm. I want to put a plug in for people who haven't seen Elektra's interview with Megan from the World Mind School. I really recommend you go back and take a look at that if you're at all interested in education and in the next generation. Because I visited the school on Wednesday. And you know, the things that Megan said that profoundly, again, shifted my perspective. My perspective changes hourly, daily, depending on what information comes in. But she was like, one of the hardest things we had to do with teachers, and the reason we couldn't keep them for a while, was we had to train them out of using reward and punishment. And they would go back to reward and punishment because it's the way they'd learned and it's the way they knew. And she said, but we already know it doesn't work, especially not with the population of this school, which really includes a vast number of what they call twice exceptional children who are very smart, very gifted, but also have challenges like dyslexia, autism, ADD. So it was so inspiring to be in the presence of this woman who's going like, yeah, I get it. That was the old model, reward and punishment. It doesn't really work. It doesn't enhance the lives of the beings that I care about. So I'm creating a school where that doesn't exist and demonstrating it can be done. And I was very moved by the fact that we have people in the world like Megan doing this really beautiful, beautiful work. And people like even the author of Invisible Rainbow. I should give him credit by saying his name. Let me see if I can find the note that I wrote this on. Can I? Arthur Firstenberg, The Invisible Rainbow, A History of Electricity and Life. But, the courage to come out and say what he saw, just like Aiden. Mm-hmm. Why do you wear makeup? Why don't you stop? And, in a way, Firstenberg is going off and going, well, let's look at the electromagnetic invisible rainbow that we can't see and start to become aware of it. and start to understand what it does and how to operate with it. And I don't find it a fearful book. He doesn't say run, but he does say be aware and let's think about it newly.
One of the things that Megan said that struck me, because I know Megan because my grandson goes there. She kept saying the first learning is social relationships. She kept going back to that. So in other words, this focus that we have in our present school system of it's academics. The truth is that isn't it. It's about how to be a human being in a way that we don't punish that which goes against life, but make enough room for it so that it becomes life enhancing. And she set up a system for that.
Yeah.
And and in watching and listening to my grandson think out loud, which he does, I see that operative. And I think what a gift to the world to support children in knowing that expanded field and experiencing it and knowing that punishment is not the answer. And I see it even I've seen it in my children. They don't like my mom would spank us, okay? Or, I told them to go to their room and my kids don't spank at all. Like you don't really teach somebody not to hit somebody if you hit them or hitting somebody. And there's a growth and progression of it over the generations, and the more space, even that we allow for this different way to come to the world makes more room in the world and makes more room in us.
Right.
For entertaining more. I think that's part of it. Like we can blame old white men for a lot of stuff, but we can't change them except that we can change how we hold them and how we hold ourselves, which is increasing the level of consciousness that I have for my own existence and how I operate it in a way that I'm really open to others.
Right.
And
just
seeing how they blend in.
And it doesn't mean they have to be our best friend.
Yeah.
But it's really the dissolving of judgment.
Yeah.
And awareness that really we've all played crucial roles. And I loved how David White says it in his poetry of self-compassion. He says, doing good things, thinking we're doing bad things, doing bad things, thinking we're doing good things. This is the paradox of being human. My consciousness isn't really an accurate monitor always about the longer term impacts, but I have to trust something holds me and something keeps me balanced.
And that's, I think, to me, listening to the inner calling is probably the truest test. Like, am I on the right path? And your whole thing goes, yes, or no, you might want to, rethink that approach. So,
well, good. Do you have any takeaways from today you want to end us with?
Stay in conversation, everybody. Because in staying in conversation, we learn a whole lot more, not just about what the other person is thinking, but how that sits in your own world so that your own level of the field that you're aware of expands. And you, my dear?
I would say I loved what you said about, just carrying that energy of harmony. So my takeaway from today is, that's really my focus, is the more I can, just reharmonize myself as a continuous practice. Is by a conversation with my cells. You said,
yes.
I'm going to keep a conversation with my cells with, to have the experiment. If I can do that, and if I can stay in that sort of balanced harmony, regardless of the externals of my life, is, what will I notice that impacts? It'll be a fascinating research.
That's a great experiment. Okay, well, thank you very much for spending this time with me. I so appreciate it. And audience, thank you for spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you.
May you be able to harmonize yourself and expand and have wonderful conversations.
Yay. It was great to meet you, Elektra. You can tell we hang out together, and it's fun to hang out with our friends. It just is. And as you say, just chat. And it was great for me because normally I'd be like, oh, what am I going to say? And I was like, no, I'll show up. Elektra, she'll show the way. And you did beautifully. So thank you.
We